The NBA has had a coaching problem for a long time now, but over the years it's gotten even worse. It doesn't matter if your entire roster is hurt or the best players on your team underperform, if you're a coach in the NBA, then all the blame will fall on you. Season after season, it feels like every coach in the league gets called into question and no fan base is happy with the person leading their team. We're at the point where coaches are being fired for coaching. Look, I'm not saying every coach deserves to be defended at all, but instead of the blame falling on the players or the front office that built the roster, it always seems to fall on them. Unless your goal is to get fired and chill on the couch for the rest of your contract, being a head coach in the NBA would be awful. There's almost no winning. You either get fired for not turning an entire franchise around in 2 years, or if you get close but not quite far enough, they'll fire you anyways. But then, in the very slight chance that you do win a championship, you're still not safe. We've seen multiple coaches over the years get fired even after doing the one thing that every team is set out to do. 1 out of 30 teams win a championship every year, so mathematically you're probably not going to win. But even if you do, the fact that you'll be fired for not winning another one right away is just crazy. Especially with the era of the NBA that we're in, where you almost have to rebuild through the draft, and then even then, keeping your players has gotten even harder. Think about Nick Nurse, who first won a championship with Toronto in 2019. They literally won it all, yet he was still fired a few years later for not winning another, even though their best player that helped them get all the way there left to go to the Clippers. It's hard to win a ring and then do it again right away when your team looks entirely different. But let's not forget the only reason Nick Nurse was even the coach is because they fired Dwayne Casey, who mind you won Coach of the Year in 2018 and was fired in the exact same week. Even if you win Coach of the Year and lead your team to the playoffs for 5 straight seasons only to lose to LeBron out of all people, it doesn't matter in the eyes of the front office. To make it even better, the year LeBron actually leaves to go play in the West, the Raptors literally won the championship. Was it Nick Nurse's coaching, or was it because the Raptors added Kawhi Leonard to their team and LeBron was no longer an obstacle? We just saw something similar with Mike Budenholzer last year. With the Bucks, Mike won Coach of the Year in 2019 and actually won a championship in 2021. To reward him, they fired him 2 years later after losing in the first round, even though his best player missed 2 of their 5 playoff games. Then, to replace Mike, they hire Adrian Griffin, who was supposed to pick up where he left off. But the Bucks didn't even give this dude a single year. They fired Adrian Griffin just 43 games into his first season. The organization at this point has now fired 2 coaches within 365 days. But the Bucks had their reasoning though, didn't they? Their record must have been awful. No, they were 30-13 with the best record in the whole Eastern Conference. The team was literally winning and they still fired him. Again, I'm not saying every coach I mentioned didn't have any flaws, but the leash these organizations are giving them is almost non-existent. To make it even worse though, the Bucks chose Doc Rivers out of all people to become their next head coach. Don't get me wrong, Doc has had his times, but even little Timmy on Twitter knew this was an awful decision. After going 30-13 with Adrian Griffin, they went 17-19 with Doc Rivers. They fired Budenholzer, then Adrian Griffin, and now Doc Rivers is right there on the hot seat as well. Then with their addition of Darvin Ham, I doubt that coaching staff will even be there in a year from now. The coach I feel bad for the most though has to be Frank Vogel. This man got scapegoated by the Lakers just to get hired by the Suns and get scapegoated again. Frank is by no means a perfect coach, he has a good amount of flaws of his own. But he's been put in some of the worst situations you can imagine over the last few years. In 2020, aka his very first season, he coaches a dominant Lakers roster to a championship while having one of the best defenses in the entire league. Then just 2 seasons later, the Lakers fired him for things that were completely out of his control. The Lakers chose not to re-sign half the team that won them the championship and then traded for Russell Westbrook, which just set the team back like 2 whole seasons. I'm not saying Westbrook was the sole reason. The entire team was completely different than their championship team and they didn't fit together at all. On top of the team not fitting together, everyone was injured throughout those 2 years. So instead of the front office taking a step back and evaluating their awful decisions, what do? They fire Frank Vogel. The organization set him up to fail and then fired him for doing so. But unfortunately for Frank, it gets even worse. He then signs to the Phoenix Suns on a 5-year deal, which is a lengthy contract. I'm sure he'll get to use that time to build a proper roster. Nope, instead the team decides to trade their soul for Bradley Beal. So now, Frank has to lead an extremely top-heavy roster that doesn't play defense at all to a championship. But of course, they get swept in the first round by the Timberwolves and they fire Frank Vogel after just one season of his 5-year deal. He had no chance to build a proper roster that he liked or to even build chemistry with the team that was already there. Again, even little Timmy on Twitter knew that team had no chance. I also have to mention the Suns coach before Frank Vogel was Monty Williams, who won Coach of the Year in 2022 just to be fired in 2023. Monty gets a lot of hate for what he's done with the Pistons, but he was the coach during the whole turnaround for the Suns franchise. He took them from a 19-win team in 2019 to a 64-win team in 2022, and they went all the way to the finals. Still, it wasn't good enough. Like I said earlier though, this has been going on for years and it's not just the NBA where this happens. But the fact that there's only a handful of coaches that have been with their team longer than 5 years is kinda crazy. Greg Popovich has been with the Spurs since 1996, which is just insane for any league. Erik Spoelstra has been the head coach of the Heat since 2008. Steve Kerr started coaching the Warriors in 2014. Then Michael Malone was hired in 2015 and Taylor Jenkins was hired in 2019. Other than that, every coach in the league has been hired in 2020 or later. And about half the teams in the NBA have fired their coach in the past 2 years alone. Is that because every single coach in the NBA is bad, or is it because the organization needs a way to change up the team without holding the players accountable? It's a lot easier to fire your head coach and hope things change than it is to make significant changes to your roster. Coaches don't count towards the salary cap, so if you have an owner like Steve Ballmer, then you could hire and fire coaches to your heart's desire. And that's the time we're in when it comes to the NBA. Even if the players significantly underperform, the organization values their top player over the coach, and their top player can do no wrong. So you also can't be too hard on that top player or he just might complain and get you fired himself. It's a players' league and they have almost all the leverage at all times. The NBA is full of some of the biggest egos in sports, which is why GMs and owners rather fire their coach to keep their players happy. And with all the firings that happen every single year, I always see the question, is coaching even important in the NBA? The answer to that is very simply yes, it's actually very important. Something as small as managing those egos you have on your roster is a skill in of itself. You can come up with the greatest offense and defense in the world, but if the players don't like you or each other, then you're still gonna get fired. As a coach, you have to deal with the players, come up with a good system, find the right lineups, make the right subs, develop the right players, etc. The Miami Heat would not have had the success that they've had without Erik Spoelstra. You can watch him do circles around other coaches. And the way things are in the NBA right now, I'm not sure how many Erik Spoelstras there's going to be going forward. It takes at least a few years to turn a franchise around, and front offices are not patient enough to let these coaches build something. Not to mention the fans are also screaming to fire their coach too. They're just as impatient. Nobody wants to watch their franchise lose, especially for a few years in a row. But until that longer leash is given, and once teams stop firing good coaches in hopes for a better one, then the cycle will just repeat itself. It's a what have you done for me lately league, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. But let me know down in the comments what you think about coaching in the NBA, and please leave a like on the video to support the channel. Also subscribe if you're new for more basketball videos just like this one.